The next session is on the initiations. And this is a lot of DK's work and writings is around the initiations and the 7 rays, and we're going to cover some of those things. One thing I find interesting is when a lot of people read my teachings, they say, well, where'd you get all this stuff from? And then sometimes I'll read DK and they'll say, oh, you got it all from DK. But as you read DK's writings and my writings, you'll see they're complementary, but you also find a lot of things that the Alice A. Bailey, or DK, remember, stands for Dwoko, the master that revealed this information, Alice A. Bailey. And you'll find a lot of things that in the Alice A. Bailey teachings that I don't talk a lot about, and a lot of things in my teachings that he doesn't talk a lot about. When people ask me where all this material came from, if it comes from some place that I've just read it, I usually quote it and say where it comes from, unless it's something kind of obvious. You can't put quotational marks around every single thing you've ever read. But if it's important, if it's something profound, I will usually say, DK said this, and maybe expand upon it. But all of us are entitled to any writings or teachings that aren't available kind of universally. We're able to go beyond that through the principle of revelation. Revelation happens through a number of different ways. You can get revelation from your own soul. You can get revelation, as we talked about, a master may send you information through the science of impression. You will get impressions. You can get certain revelations from a higher part of your mind that just is like a great computer that processes everything and will feed you down material and data, information will come down to you. You can get revelation from people who passed on to the other side. Maybe people who are close to you, you're still in tune with them and you get impressions from them. They may see that you're going to make a mistake or something and try to contact you and send you an impression about that. You can get impressions from the Holy Spirit, which is a great entity and principle that communicates knowledge through the soul. And the soul and the Holy Spirit are a little bit different. In fact, it's the soul. There's the solar angel, and then there's the soul energy. The soul energy, the soul principle, is the mediator between spirit and matter, or God and man. And it is the point that is talked about, which is neither where land, water, and air meet, which is neither wet nor dry. Think of that point, where land, water, and air meet. And the point which is neither wet nor dry is a symbol of the soul, where spirit and matter meet together and interplay. And this produces the soul energy. And the soul angel works through this soul, through this point of soul energy. All the spiritual principles filter down through the point of soul energy, the interplay of spirit and matter. And that point, that 0 point, is where we must focus our attention in order to pull down revelation from higher sources. And so, I found Annie's statement interesting, that she's been reading a lot of books and they all say the same thing. You know, when I was younger, when I would often find some new and interesting books, but I find the older I get, the more difficult it is to find anything new. Everybody just seems to be repeating what everybody else says. So I hope the teachings we are giving out here strike some chords, open up some doors, and produce some new thoughts that maybe you haven't really been presented with exactly before in the same way. So we're going to talk about initiation, and I'll cover some of the things that DK has covered, but I'm also going to present some of the basic principles behind initiation a little bit different light than other teachers have presented them. The main thing that I say about initiation that's different than anyone has presented it before is in this very simple statement. An initiate is one who initiates. When you think of it, that makes sense, since the word initiate means to initiate, right? Yet, in a lot of schools of thought, they look at an initiate as somebody who goes through some program or goes through some weird initiation rites, or learns a certain set of mantras or something like this, or maybe down the Cape Fear or whatever, but he goes through these initiation rites, and then he's an initiate. And but a person who goes through something like that really didn't initiate anything, did he? So does that make him a true initiate? To be a true initiate, you have to be able to initiate something, or at least assist in initiating something. Either come up with something to initiate, or find something that's a great idea and assist in a group effort to initiate something. And the higher initiate you are, the more you're involved in the group effort, that thing. Because the individual effort applies to more of the lower initiations, and the group effort applies to more of the higher initiations. DK has outlined 9 initiations that we go through. 7 of them are gone through on this planet, and the last 2 are of such a high order they can't even be taken on this planet, and the graduate has to go to Sirius, the star system of Sirius, where the higher lodge of the Brotherhood is, and they have to finish off the last 2 initiations there. Christ himself is working on his 7th initiation, and then when he has completed it, about 1,000 years from now, he will then move on to Sirius and complete the last 2 initiations. And then in the far future, near the end of our evolution, DK says he will come back as the cosmic Christ. What that means, he doesn't really explain. Except he will come back and visit us and give us some type of final teaching near the end of our evolution, after he completes his training. And it's interesting, it says the first will be last and the last first. So if that principle applies, when he graduates and goes to the star system of Sirius, it's quite possible he'll be kind of amateur there. So the first will be last and the last first. And this often happens. We graduate from one sphere, we go to another, and we're just like a babe in the woods, and then we eventually work our way through, we become master in that sphere. And we become the first, and then we graduate, we become the last again. So we must never get the mindset that we've got it all, because when we do, we'll eventually find ourselves among others that are much, much higher than ourselves. And this one thing I've found very humbling in my spiritual context is that I've learned there are lives that are much more advanced than myself. It makes me look like a babe in the woods that doesn't know what he's doing. And it's very humbling to experience the presence of someone you know is much greater than you are. And when a person lives in the ego, he does not encounter anyone that he thinks is greater than him. Have you ever met people like that?
Yeah.
He doesn't think anyone is greater than him?
Why do you think
men, they are greater than you, because they have the mindset that says that they're not greater than anyone. What gave you that feeling that you were less than?
Well, they don't really have that mindset. As DK, one of his most profound statements is true humility is recognizing your place upon the path and acting accordingly. DK tells us that his place upon the path is he's a fifth degree initiate. And he's rubbed shoulders with others that are higher than him. That makes him humble. But he knows that he's farther along the path than we are.
So it's a degree of knowledge, is that what you're saying?
Not so much a degree of knowledge, but the degree of spiritual advancement and the degree of mastery. It's a degree of mastery more than knowledge itself. What do you have mastered? And that's what an initiate is. An initiate is a person that has mastered certain things and brought them under his control. Now, you have we have 7 initiations that's taken on this planet. And we're going to talk about these 7 and just barely touch on the other 2 because they're so far above us, even DK doesn't understand. But before a person becomes an initiate, when a person first begins his evolution here as a human being, he becomes a self-conscious entity, and all he really understands is that I am me. That's the feeling he gets when he first becomes a human being. And he graduates, the various parts of himself unite from the lower kingdoms and produce what he is now, in connection with the higher parts of himself. And so basically he starts out in kind of a savage state. And it's very physical. He hasn't even developed his emotional body. He doesn't understand like romantic love or tenderness, things like that. It's all, we all started our evolution, chasing wild animals and killing them and fighting other tribes and different things like this. And this is the way all of us started our evolution. And by trial and error over a long period, this period of physical polarization of our mindset lasted for many lifetimes. For some of us, it started in other spheres besides this earth. But we spent hundreds of different lifetimes in this by slowly learning by trial and error. Then after slowly learning by trial and error what works and what doesn't work, we begin to develop emotional consciousness. Slowly, this began to sink into us that the feeling nature was important. We began to develop permanent relationships with mates. And in the beginning, we didn't even have a permanent relationship with our mates quite often. But it was just a relationship for procreation or selfish purposes, or more like the animals do to a large degree. And so we developed, we fine-tuned our emotional selves so that we learned to fall in love, we learned to be attached to possessions, we learned to want to have things, and basically we learned how to be selfish, consciously selfish in many ways. And the type of love we developed was love that if I love somebody, then I want to possess them. And then he reaches a point where he thinks, this selfishness and everything, or this living life just like everybody else isn't cutting it. There's got to be something higher. When he reaches that point where he thinks there's got to be something better than this, better than like just what everybody's doing, or better than what I've been told. At that point, he becomes what is called an aspirant. He is not an initiate yet, but he is an aspirant. He begins to aspire to spiritual things, to something higher. And many of the New Age people that you meet in the world are aspirants. They're aspiring to something higher. They've been stimulated, and they know something is out there, but they're not sure what it is, but they're aspiring. And the person aspires for a number of lifetimes until he has an experience that brings him to the doors of the first initiation. Does anyone remember what the name of the first initiation is?
Baptism.
What?
Baptism.
No? That's the second.
Birth.
What?
Birth.
Birth of what?
Christ.
In the what?
Heart.
Birth of Christ in the heart is the first initiation. Okay, this is represented a little bit in the born-again experience. A person that has the true born-again experience becomes a first-degree initiate. But not everybody that says they're born again is truly born again. You know, Billy Graham, all these people have these crusades. Okay, if you accept Jesus in your heart, walk forward and be saved, and they'll be come forward and tears in their eyes and crying and everything, and they'll think that they're born again at that moment. Well, some people may be born again through this. Usually it's not through an experience like that, but it can be. But it's an experience where they contact the Christ, the soul, for the first time. The soul principle is the same as the Christ principle. And they contact, it's the birth of the linking you with soul contact for the first time. You have a birth of that energy. You touch bases with the Christ within for the first time, and you really know you touch something. And you really know you want to get closer to this. And when this happens for the first time, and you commit yourself to following this road wherever it leads. You don't know where it's going to lead, but you've experienced a new birth, and you follow it. Then you become a first-degree initiate. So, what are the marks of the first-degree initiate above the aspirant? The aspirant is aspiring to something higher, and he does this through kind of common sense. He uses the mind to eliminate things. Well, this can't be right, or this can't be right, or, you know, the Catholic Church can't be exactly the highest thing in the universe, or such and such could it be, or maybe there's something else besides the Bible. You know, I read the Bible and it doesn't answer all my questions. There's got to be more out there. That's the aspect. But then the first-degree initiate gets a revelation from the soul, a contact with the soul, and he knows knows beyond any doubt that there is a God within him, a God contact with him, some type of contact there. He knows that's there, and he wants to follow it wherever it goes, and he commits himself. If he just gets that contact and then ignores it, then he loses his initiation pretty much for that lifetime, and he'll get another chance in the future lifetime. And many people do. Many people, when they get the first contact, will think, well, that must have been my imagination. You know, I'm not righteous enough to have any contact with God or Spirit, you know. And besides, the direction it leads me isn't where I want to go. My friends and family may think I'm crazy or whatever, so he disregards it. And many people, when they're approaching the first initiation, will disregard it and fail the first initiation and have to come back another lifetime. But sooner or later, we're touched by that, by the soul contact, and we decide, we make a definite decision, I like this. I like this a lot, and I'm not going to let it go. And I'm going to follow it wherever it leads, and he commits himself. Then, he truly fulfills what the Scripture talks about being born again. Born again, you put off the old man, and you put on the new man, or new woman. And it is. You've developed a whole new attitude to where now your life is centered on the Spirit instead of personality and the things of the world, so to speak. So you become a first-degree initiate, and that's the purpose of you must be born again in order to enter into the kingdom of heaven. You must begin your initiation in order to enter the kingdom of God. That's another way of saying it.
Who's the primitive guy? Is he not an initiate?
Who's what?
The primitive guy that only focuses on himself and you know what I mean? Should we talk about him a little while
Yeah, the primitive person, no. The average person you meet on the street is not an initiate.
ago? Well, that person is not an initiate at all.
An average person that will say he's a born-again Christian is not an initiate. However, there are a handful of people who claim to be born-again Christians who are truly born-again. You know, the initiates are found everywhere. They're scattered, and they'll be found in every organization. Even some of the churches that kind of like kindergarten, many of us have a handful of initiates in them, and they're there to kind of prod everybody else along. And they're usually not in leadership positions. Sometimes they will be, but oftentimes they'll just be ignored by everybody else. But they'll be there on the sidelines somewhere, stimulating people, stimulating their friends.
So that guy's a primal man, I guess. And the guy we're talking about now has left that location. And
Yeah, the initiate has gone beyond tribal living and has gone beyond just being interested in making a living and his kids and everything, and he's beyond that. He's made the first degree initiate has made the soul contact, the spiritual contact. So he knows there's things beyond this world. He's not sure what God is. You know, he was sure before he became initiated what God was. God was what his preacher told him.
so the aspid is higher than this guy.
What's that?
The aspid. What?
No, the initiate is higher than the aspirant.
But the aspirin is higher than
Aspir?
Aspiring to be.
Aspirant.
Aspiring.
Aspirin.
Yeah, the aspirant aspires to be an initiate.
Okay, so he's a little bit above the primal guy we just talked about.
Right.
Yeah. He's above the man on the street. So it's,
And he's sort of the forerunner to becoming the first initiate.
yeah, he's aspiring to go higher, and what he's really aspiring toward is to be an initiate. Okay?
Yeah, I don't read the keys much, and my wife, I'm just, you guys are way ahead.
Oh, no problem. I mean, there's a number of people just like you here that haven't read much of Alice A. Bailey. Okay, so the initiate, the first initiation then, is the birth of the Christ in the heart. That you realize that Christ is more than another individual out there, even though he has, the one that lived in Nazareth, occupied the position of the Christ, exemplified the Christ energy and the Christ principle. But the Christ is more than that. The Christ is a mediator between God and man, and when we find that mediator within us, this means that we have a true spiritual contact that is real, and we understand for sure, for really the first time in all of our lifetimes, that there is something higher. You thought there was something higher when you were in aspiring. You thought there was, and you were looking for it, but now you have found something. But you haven't found it all. You just found the very beginning. Okay? Yeah.
Cousin Ash says, knowing that there's something higher, meaning you have soul contact, no, right?
What's
Just
your question?
knowing that there's a Christ within
Yeah.
and believing that does not necessarily mean you have soul contact.
No.
Well, it's the beginning of your soul contact. When you first make your first contact, that's the birth of the Christ in the heart. And it's real, and the contact is real, and you know for sure there's something
How do you
higher.
know?
How do you
How do you
know?
know if you had if it's happened?
How do you know what's happened to you?
Yeah.
Because you will have felt it. Okay? If I feel this chair, I know the chair is there. If you fall in love with somebody and you really feel in love, you know you have the feeling. Don't you? You know that feeling was real.
Mhm.
When the soul touches you, you know that feeling is real also. Okay? You know that it's there, and you know there's a lot more waiting for you. You don't know what it is, but you're like a babe in the woods. It's called the birth of the Christ in the heart. And the birth of Christ's life had the symbols of all the initiations. And the symbol of the first initiation was the birth of Christ in the manger, in the cave, so to speak. The legend says he was actually born in a cave, and that's what the manger was, in the cave. So in the cave of the heart is the birth of Christ, the first initiation. And when it does happen, when you experience it, you will know it to be real. But when the very first happens, like I say, you may disregard it. You may talk yourself out of it. When you're going through it, you don't have to acknowledge it's a real energy you're feeling. But then afterwards, did I really feel something? Or I can make it up. And you can talk yourself out of it and then miss out on the first initiation for the rest of your life. But if you acknowledge to yourself, this was real, and I'm going to follow the most real thing I've ever found, and see where it leads me. And like I say, when you begin to follow it, you become unsure of a lot of things you were sure of before. You were sure, you knew exactly what God was and what Jesus was and what the Bible said. But when you become an initiate, a lot of the things you believed in are undone. Because you're not getting your source from some preacher out there anymore. You're getting it from within. From how it registers within between you and your soul. And it's not necessarily the same data as you've been fed throughout your life. You'll get new insights on things, on how things work. Yeah, Rick.
Is there an age barrier or age limit when you might achieve this, or can that happen even in childhood?
You mean like 40 or 50 or something like that? No, but most of your initiates are usually achieved by the age of about 54 or so. But generally you'll achieve most of them before the age of 30. But sometimes in your second Saturn cycle, you will achieve an additional initiation. But we're going to talk about that a little bit too, about the age thing. But we'll just continue on this particular line. Okay. On the first initiation, you begin control of the physical body and physical reality. This is the first initiation, you seek to master your physical world. The second initiation, you seek to master the emotional world. The third initiation, you seek to master the mind.
What?
The mind.
Mine.
Mind. M-I-N-D. Mind. Okay, so when you become a first degree initiate, you have soul contact and you realize that you need to get the physical appetites under your master. And this is one of the purposes of the churches, is to prepare you for the first initiation. Like the basic 10 Commandments teaches physical mastery. Thou shalt not lust after thy neighbor's wife, type of thing. Okay? So this is teaching physical mastery. Thou shalt not kill, teaching physical mastery over. You don't kill your neighbor because you don't like them, Or thou shalt not steal. You don't steal. You're mastering everything in the physical reality. Obey the Sabbath day, keep it holy. Again, this is strict physical control, giving yourself the rest you need. Now it goes beyond this. Physical mastery is getting your body in basic shape so it stays relatively healthy. Getting your sexual appetites under control so your sexual energy is used in a positive way rather than a negative way. And thou shalt not commit adultery is the commandment that helps with this type of mastery. So all the religions of the world, they're all preparing you for the first initiation. And this is why many of the aspirants to the first initiation are in the world's religions, religion of some type. And another thing it teaches is to give some of your money to the church. Even though the church may misuse that money, you're obtaining some mastery over your physical reality by dedicating a certain amount of money to the church. You're obtaining mastery over something that's important to you physically, which is money. And so, this physical mastery doesn't have to be perfect by the first initiation. You will continue. For instance, Kennedy was an initiate, but it didn't look like he was much of a master over his sexual appetites, from what we've learned about the guy. It's kind of funny. Sometimes there's a residual effect, and it's also based on how he was taught. He was taught by his father that this is the way you use women. I mean, his dad sat down and he taught his kids that this was the way to go. So that had a big influence over him. And this type of authority that you're taught, what's right and wrong, is actually not overcome completely until the third initiation. So some types of authoritative teachings that are embedded in us remain with us up to the third initiation, and will make some people that are initiates look like they're not initiates because they're not, haven't broken out of that mold or haven't really understood how to master themselves. But let's look at how Kennedy was a master in many ways. He was very ill when he was young. And he had a tremendous back problem. His back was just falling apart. And when he learned, for instance, that when World War II started, he wanted to join the Allies, and he volunteered to join the service, and they rejected it. And so he did back exercises for 3 months. He did exercise himself, and he was finally accepted. But he disciplined himself with tremendous discipline in order to get in to serve his country. And that's a mark of initiative that can do something like that. And then even in the service, when he was PT boat commander, he had tremendous pain in his back, and he just ignored the pain. He negated it in order to perform his duty. And when his PT boat was sunk, he actually, even with all his pain he was undergoing himself, he saved several people's lives by pulling them ashore himself. And then after they were trapped on this island in the middle of nowhere, everybody else just sat around waiting to die. Well, he went out and swam out and tried to find help, swam as far as he could without feeling he could go back, and then he'd go back, and then he'd swim out again. I mean, he kept trying. He was always trying to save everybody. Everybody else was just sitting around twiddling their thumbs. He was initiating things, trying to do something. But when you study his life, you'll see that really that the mindset he had about using women was probably the major flaw he had. It was a residual effect that because of the teachings of his father, basically, that he had not yet overcome. And if he had been taught correctly, he probably would have been mastery of the sexual energy also. But when a person understands what's right and what's wrong, the first degree initiate will have power to master physical reality. All the passions and appetites of the physical world to his satisfaction, to the point that he feels content and happy with himself, and at peace with himself, and at peace with how the spirit within him is directing him. And when he achieves this, he becomes first degree initiate. Okay, what's the main focus to become a second degree initiate?
Emotional?
Right. To master the emotions. And if mastering the physical reality isn't difficult enough, mastering the emotions is the most difficult, perhaps, as the DK says, is one of the most difficult initiations, because the emotions have such a powerful effect on the soul. And we can see it's easier for some people to go on a fast for a week and not eat any food at all than it is to control their anger, or to control their emotions in any way. But to control your emotions is extremely difficult. It takes quite a lot of effort and sustain effort to completely master it. Now keep in mind this, that in between the initiates, when you move from a first to a second degree, like Kennedy, you'll have a residual effect on certain areas of your life. So it's difficult to tell, well, he's a second degree initiate because he's done this. Or you could say, or you can't really say he's not a second degree initiate because he looks like he loses control here in a certain way. But like I say, as you pass, you'll have certain residual effects. It's a little bit like graduating from Algebra 1 to Algebra 2. When you finish Algebra 1, has anyone here taken 2 years of algebra before in high school or anything? Okay. Now, Mary Ellen, when you finished Algebra 1, did you pretty much know everything in the book?
Sort of. No.
Sort of?
Yes. Yeah, I knew how to do it.
Okay. Well, in my situation, I probably only knew about a third of what was in the book. But when you moved to Algebra 2, even though you didn't know everything in Algebra 1, you kind of got the basics down. So you got the basics down enough so you kind of fill in the blanks as you learn in Algebra 2. And so this is the way it is with initiations. You don't have to achieve perfection. You just have to achieve relative mastery so that your soul, between you and your soul, you feel like you can handle any situation that comes up, the physical reality or the emotional reality. So there will be some residual learning to do in the first initiation as you're moving on to the second. And like the example of Kennedy, for instance. So the main point of attack to learn the second initiation is to master the emotions. How do you go about mastering the emotions?
Use the higher.
How do you do it? Joel?
Think things through before you react to it.
Right. Yeah, the old idea of before you get angry, count to 3, that's a kind of a mental thing to do, a simple little mental exercise. Basically, as we first begin to master the emotions, we make a tremendous number of mistakes. The emotions lead us into experience. There's a reason for these emotions, and there's a reason why we go through a period where we're led by the emotions. The emotions lead us into experience. They lead us into areas that we would never go if we were thinking like it, right? They lead us into marriages that are a disaster. We think, when we're in them, we think, man, if I was thinking correctly, I would have never gotten, well, this guy, I mean, what do I have in common with this guy? Why did I pick this redneck or whatever? So your emotions led you there because maybe like you're female and you go to some bar and you meet this redneck guy and he's just totally different and he's exciting and different than anybody you ever met before, and you fall in love and you get married to him after a week, and then you find out he's just not meant for you at all. I mean, what can you do? But you open yourself up to the love energy in that person. And the interesting thing about this is you can fall in love with anybody. People think you can only fall in love with that certain person. And the reason they think this is there's only certain people they allow themselves to open up to. But when you open up to anybody and that anybody else opens up to you, there will be a flow of soul energy between the two of you, and you can fall in love. What prevents this is barriers between you. If you look at another person and say, that person isn't good looking enough for me, you're not going to open up to that person. And if one of you doesn't open up, then there will not be the flow. And it's impossible to fall in love. But if you say that other person isn't smart enough, or not educated enough, or not in my standard of living, we have all of these barriers we put up. My friend Wayne has all kinds of barriers. That's why he's still single to this day. You know, every gal he meets, she doesn't have this, she doesn't have this. I mean, I could never make it go with, and he doesn't. Of course, he doesn't open up because he has all these criteria he wants in the perfect woman, and never found the perfect one. But oh yes, the second initiation. Emotions are very difficult to master, and in connection with the emotions is a principle called glamour. And in connection with the physical reality is a principle called Maya. Maya is the pole of matter itself. You ever see somebody of the opposite sex walk by that's really good looking and you go, just like a pole? That's the pole of matter. And that's what you have to master in mastering the physical reality. You have to not negate it, not pretend it's not there, but master it. So you're not adversely affected or by it, so you're not tempted in a way that destroys your relationships, that destroys trust with other people. And DK makes an interesting statement, which is important for people along the path, because when a person goes along the path, he pretty much leaves the religions behind, and he governs himself. And the tendency of many would-be initiates governing themselves is they tend to go a little bit crazy for a while, because I don't have anybody telling me what to do, so I'll just do whatever I want, and oftentimes they indulge themselves too much. And so the advice DK gives is the true initiate will never lower the standards of the humanity of which he is a part. They always seek to raise the standard, not lower it. And I've seen many people in my life become interested in the spiritual path, and many of them start lowering the standard after they enter the spiritual path. They think, well, we can just have a free-for-all and love fest type thing, or share other people's wives, or they come up with all kinds of concoctions that actually lowers the standards rather than raising the standards up. And this is a process that a lot of people go through. It's a little bit like when you're raised by strict parents and you go away to college. Oftentimes the kid will just go crazy because, oh, I'm a free guy now. I'll just do whatever I want and drinks every night and parties every night and just makes up for all the lost time where his parents had him under their thumb.
Jojo, I have a bit of trouble with the standards thing. Being former LDS, I've had very strict standards that I was expected to live. So when you use that word and you say keep your standards high, my parental voice in my head is saying every time I take a drink of wine or wear sleeveless clothes or do things like that, I have lowered my standards. My mother quite often tells me that, as a matter of fact.
Well, it depends. You gotta look at what's really a standard of spiritual living.
So that's
wearing sleeveless clothes is not a spiritual lowering of any spiritual standard. Or what was the other thing? Drinking a glass of wine.
My mother thinks it is.
Yeah, they think it is. What is a true spiritual standard and what the churches say is a spiritual standard is two different things.
So how do you determine that in your
By the principle of harmfulness. If you're creating harm, then you're lowering the standard. If you are being harmless, if you drink a glass of wine a day, research has shown that that's actually beneficial to your heart, so how is that hurting anybody? Doesn't hurt anybody.
Bible says beer is good.
Especially Irish kids.
Yeah, but if you're wearing attractive clothes, how does that hurt anybody? That doesn't hurt anybody. But if you see your neighbor's wife and you say, hey man, I want her, and if we do it in secret and it's not going to hurt anybody, well, then you actually are creating harm, because you're directing her attention away from her spouse, and you're creating a betrayal. So in this way, you're lowering the standard. But many people, that are aspirants, they will think that anything goes, as long as nobody knows about it, or they'll think nobody gets hurt. But many times they will do some very harmful things. For instance, I talked to a guy that organized a spiritual group one time. And he was an older guy, and he did it when he was younger. And he said the group was really great. I mean, they had soul contact, and everybody had a really good feeling. And then they started sharing each other's wives. And everything, he said, it just exploded. I mean, everybody hated each other by the time it was over, you know. And so everybody thought this was not harmful at all, but it did create harm. And so that's an important principle. DK says that, you know, it's kind of an obvious thing that isn't obvious to a lot of people. He says that his true disciple does not lower the standards for humanity. He will support the good standards that they have and seek to raise them higher. Many churches say you can't even dance or party or whatever. You know, they think you got to not do a whole bunch of stuff in order to be spiritual. That's not true spirituality. But the disciple does not lower the standard of true spirituality. He lives in a state of harmlessness. And DK mentioned this again and again and again. The key to progression is always the path of harmlessness. And harmlessness takes judgment. Because that which appears to be harmless, like the guy says, well, let you and me make it on the side your husband will never find out, therefore nobody will get hurt. Well, no. On the subtle planes, the wife or the spouse always does know, because there's a communication, and then this suspicion arises, and then the relationship goes way downhill. The communication between the two is interfered with. That's an example of they think they're being harmless, but they're not. And other times, if you wear pretty clothes, attractive clothes, churches will say, well, you're being harmful, you're instilling wrong desires in men. Well, no, that's the guy's fault. Maybe he's got wrong desires in men. Harmfulness is really difficult to judge. Because, like when Jesus showed up preaching on the scene, the Jews said to him, well, you're trying to destroy our way of life and our law. You're trying to destroy the law of Moses. You're an awful God. You know, you're creating a lot of harm here. And, but was Jesus creating the harm?
No.
Where did the harm come from?
Their laws.
It was from their imagination, a lot of it, because really destroying their way of black and white idea of the law was really a good thing. But whenever we are attached to something and we have that attachment destroyed, we think it's bad. Whereas in reality, it's usually good. We need to, and this is the basic teaching of the Buddha, is releasing ourselves from attachments. Release yourself from attachments, you can then attain nirvana, which is the same as the words of Jesus telling us that to be born again and release ourselves from the old things and put on the new, we attain the kingdom of heaven. And okay, so the important thing to overcome, two important things to overcome, has to be overcome in the second initiation. And that is glamour and the pull of the emotion. Master the emotions. Someone tell me what DK means when he talks about a glamour. Okay, could we say a glamour is an inflation of the ego around some idea about yourself? Yeah, sounds about right. An inflation of the ego around some idea about yourself. Okay? This often happens, yeah, Robert.
Can a glamour also have more of a negative connotation, like I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough?
Right, it can be both ways.
Yeah.
And there's even the glamour of false humility. Oh, I'm not nearly as good as you, whereas the person is really thinking, I'm a lot better than you. You know? I mean, have you ever had people say that to you? I'm not nearly as good as you, and you know what you're really thinking?
Yeah, but what if you really believe
Yeah, sometimes you do. And,
Yeah.
oh, can that be a glamour then? Is that?
Yeah,
It can be. A glamour is something that gives the ego more control over you. And if you have, that's called like the glamour of humility. The fact that you can say, oh, I've got to be real humble. If I'm humble enough, then I can be accepted by God. So the guy goes around being overly humble all the time, thinking that this makes him righteous. So really, if he does it with that attitude, it is a glamour. If he does it with just the attitude of thinking, of true humility, thinking, well, you have two choices. Either I'm at this stage or I'm this stage. I'll just act like I'm at the lower stage so I won't be disappointed. No, that's okay. That's a good way to do it because
No one will expect to know.
that's where we usually are. We're usually in the lower part of where we think we are at, if we're given the choice. And it's like Jesus said, Jesus gave a parable about this, about talking about the master of the house having a dinner, and the most important guest would sit next to the master of the house. Well, he says, if you go in there and you think you're an important guest and you sit next to the master, and he says, hey, you don't belong here, you sit at that end of the table, the least important guest said, he says, then you'll feel really embarrassed. He says, in this way, he says, he told us to be humble and to just assume that we are at the low end of the table. And if you go in and sit at the low end of the table, and then the master says, hey, come up higher and sit next to me, and you'll say, oh, really? Can you sit up there? Then you'll feel good. But if you're told, hey, you don't belong here, go back and live with a scum, then, or sit with the retards back there, then you'll think, wow, here I thought I was right up there with the master, and I'm not. So this is a good way for us to approach it. This is true humility. If we don't know where we are, just assume the lower aspect rather than the higher. Once you're given something, you have to follow it in order to get more. Okay?
What symbolizes in Jesus' life the second initiation? Is it the temptation in the desert?
No, what symbolizes the second initiation in Jesus' life was when he was baptized in the River Jordan, and then the Holy Spirit came upon him. And the second initiation, you overcome the emotional world, the glamour, you become humble because you're not affected by glamours anymore. And we'll talk a little bit more about glamours. But we need to overcome those glamours and negate them so we don't inflate our self-importance.
So it's a baptism.
Yeah, when we're humble and then submit to the baptism of the Spirit, then that's a symbol of entering the second initiation. Okay, glamour then is the inflation of self by the ego. And the ego takes different aspects of herself and builds up her importance of herself. And this happens when we develop the feeling nature. As I said, before the feeling nature is developed, and we're just living on like tribal instincts, and the primitive man is very instinctual because he's very closely related to the animal kingdom yet, and animals have very powerful instincts. And they react very quickly to these instincts. And the primitive man that we used to be able to go used to act very instinctual. And he didn't think about if he was really self-important or not. He just thought of himself as a member of the tribe and did what he was, his internal computer program motivated him to do. But then when we develop the feeling nature, we learn the powers of romantic love, we learn the powers of anger and love and hate and all these different range of emotions. Associated with that is the feelings amplify things. And what the feeling really amplified in us that became a problem was our feeling of importance. And all of us have gone through cycles in our past life and maybe even in our current where we feel like we are really important people. Now what's interesting is probably the most important people on the planet are the masters, and the most important of the masters is Christ himself. Yet there's an interesting statement he made when people were talking about how great a guy he was. He said these words. He says, "Of myself I can do nothing." He says, "It is the Father within me that does the works. It's not me that's doing these things. It is the Father within me, because of myself I can do nothing." What does that tell you about Christ? Glamour. Right, he was a master of glamour. He didn't see himself as really important. Part of the reason was, even though he was doing something important from our perspective, he saw a bigger perspective. And the bigger perspective, he saw that what he was doing just as small in relation to the whole universe, or in relation to the whole solar system. And this is the way it is. We may see ourselves as very important, but all you got to do to feel not important is look up at the stars at night and see that each one of those stars is either a galaxy or a solar system. If it's a galaxy, then it's composed of about 6 or 7 billion star systems, billions of planets, trillions of people that are smarter than you are. And then the self-importance just evaporates. But it's the tendency of glamour to make us feel like we are the most important person on the earth. So anyway, we have to overcome our various glamours.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the New Age Christian Synthesis podcast. If what you heard rang true and you'd like to find out more, please visit J.J. Dewey's website at freeread.com. That's FREEREAD.com.